talk about the Cabot Creek allocation request. Any questions or comments? Joe?
I guess it's pretty hard to talk about water when we're in the middle of a flood. But I do want to say that we don't always have an excess of water. And this has been shown. We had droughts before, as you know, Alan, because you must remember people having, with cattle, they had to, Ackermans in particular, had to draw water out of the brook. So this is a valuable resource. And I first became interested in Agrimart, I will say Agrimart's water, when I received the notice in the mail for the new public water system source application, which was a 2007 application that Agrimart had to drill 3 wells, which were already drilled, which they failed to get Act 250 permits for, even though all of them were within a permitting area, permitting time. According to Ed Stanek from District 5 Environmental. Now, through the whole process of finding out about these wells, because I was concerned about the amount of water that was being withdrawn, I actually obtained the schematics from Cabot Creamery, and I can show you that 1-inch line that you were talking about, that water would run slowly. The only connection that they have from the Cabot Village water source is a 1-inch line, and this goes to their office building. I'm happy to show this to you. Right here. This is the only line that they've ever had, and it went to the office building. Now this was confusing because apparently Agrimart had let the Agency of Natural Resources Water Resource Board of Scott Pingree and Scott Stewart and Rodney Pingree believed that Agrimart's source of water was from the village water supply. So they assumed all this time that they were getting their potable needs met by the town, when in fact they were getting it from 3 wells. This is there's 4 artesian wells. There's only, at that point, there are 4 artesian wells, which they claim to have condensed to 3. This was done by the Johnson Company. This was part of their schematics that I entered into evidence. And this is the Agrimart Cabot Facility Potable Water Storage Reservoir Schematic. As you can see, it comes from well 1, well 2, well 3. It goes into these tanks, it's chlorinated, it then goes to the general creamery, it goes to the cut and wrap, and to all the other buildings. And on every indirect discharge permit, they have always listed that they had sufficient water, except for 1 year where they got an additional, they were permitted 70 gallons per minute. And in 1 year they got an additional 2.5 gallons per minute, which on all of their permits through Act 250 and A&R they have claimed it was sufficient water. This is the actually 2007 application that they applied for, and as you can see their water needs were 100,000 gallons per minute, gallons per day, or 70 gallons per minute, and they said that that was sufficient to supply their creamery with potable and other needs. Okay, so now,
what are the sources of these?
These are from the 3 wells that they dug, which I showed you in the original.
Of the documents.
This came from the Johnson Company as part of the source protection plan for Agrimart that I obtained through a Freedom of Information Act, because I wanted to find out about these wells. And what I was able to find out, this was a blown-up version. This was Agrimart Cabot Creamery's water use for March 2006 through March 2007. These are the actual metered amounts that they withdrew. As you can see, they were substantially, if you add them together, you'll see they're substantially over 72.5 gallons per minute, which is what they were only asking for 70, remember. This ended up, and the average ended up being 79.5 gallons per minute. So they were overusing the water, and this was prior to them getting a permit for an increase of 50,000 gallons per day of their waste. This was back when they were disposing of 100,000 gallons a day of waste. These are the actual figures done by the Johnson Company. So in order for them to pump this in through this 1-inch line on the original schematic that only goes to the office building, there would have to be new plumbing all the way through. You can't just call this segregated if they add to this and ship it to all the buildings. If it's only going to the office building, the faculty building, which is what is shown on that schematic, it doesn't change. You can say what you want, but the map isn't going to lie. And there is the one, I marked it on here right here. This is the one line.
Well, I'm pretty disappointed that people from the Agency of Natural Resources looked at a 1-inch line and were under the impression that they was feeding a
Well,
bunch of buildings at that creamery.
there's been a
no,
lot of shocking
No,
stuff.
I'm just saying, but I mean, they came in here when they asked for their water and they were gonna connect 3 different lower places.
Yeah, well,
But,
okay, so this
no, I'm
gets,
just saying, I mean,
Yeah, I know.
I'm not,
you were shocked, I was shocked, we were all
I'm
shocked.
just looking at it because there's no way you're gonna pull that through a 1-inch line.
Okay, as a result of this, this was the reason they had the new public water source system was because they needed it for potable needs. Potable needs meant that they were supplying water for more than 25 people. And of course, Cabot Creamery, Agrimart has been supplying not only for that, but for,
Did I see that?
yeah, sure you can. That was my original freedom of information. So we had a meeting about it, because I requested a meeting, because this was all very unclear to me. So we had a public comment period with the Agency of Natural Resources. Rodney Pingree was present, Scott Stewart was present, and this was held June 21st, 2010, which was last summer, right here in this building. And at that point, Larry Gochi, who was a selectman, gave testimony that Agrimart had so much water that they intended to sell one of their wells to the town of Cabot for their drinking needs. And when Larry was questioned about why they didn't purchase it, Larry said, well, they had too much water, and the reason that they didn't purchase it was because it was too much paperwork for the town to do that. So I failed to see why Agrimart at that point would then be requesting 78,000 gallons from the village water system, other than the fact that they are involved now because the Agency of Natural Resources, District 5 in Barre, Vermont, has found them guilty. The jurisdictional opinion stated conclusions, the context of Act 250 Rule A, 2A-6, material change relative, the use of the creamery's water supply system has been beyond the permitted rate of 72.5 gallons a minute, and changes in the use of the warehouse structure. Accordingly, they asked for reconsideration, Agrimart did, and they were told the requests for reconsideration are denied. Accordingly, the conclusion of the jurisdictional opinion 513 are final, subject to any appeal to the environmental court, as stated on page 7 of the jurisdictional opinion, and this was signed by Ed Stanek. So in other words, they have appealed to the environmental court. So they are trying to avoid permits, basically. Now there's reasons for that. And we were kind of figuring out here, they also tried to say that they wanted 110 gallons per minute from these wells. This was part of their jurisdictional opinion by their attorneys, because they apparently tried to misconstrue the capacity of the wells with what they were permitted to withdraw. Those are two very different matters.
Jill, I want to interrupt you for just a second. I am very interested in all this,
Mm-hmm.
but I would ask that you not use judgmental terms when you're.
No, but they were found guilty of this, that is the truth.
Okay, but just
Right.
be careful not to be,
I'm trying not to be.
okay, appreciate it.
I really am trying not to, Caleb. This is all shocking to me. I don't think anybody could imagine. At the same time, we had been talking with different hydrologists about the withdrawal of this amount of water and the over-withdrawal. And what they concluded, several of them, was that this could affect the headwaters to the Winooski River. Also, they said that this could eventually withdraw the water from our entire aquifer, because a lot of their water is going out as wastewater, and as you know, it's being trucked out to other areas. The tune of their permit allows them to do that at 150,000 gallons a day. So this is not water that's being restored. The next problem comes in was that I have been researching this a great deal, because this is a huge concern to me. This water is just not going to come back. So I went to a special conference with an Eric Henson. And Eric Henson is a hydrologist, and he was able to tell me that he's a source protection specialist, and he was able to tell me categorically that only 15 aquifers have been mapped in the state of Vermont, and this is not one of them. One in particular that's been mapped is down in Randolph, because they had the pure water bottling system there. And also it was indicated that the town water and Agrimark's water could all be contained in that same aquifer, because it's never been mapped. And that's a huge concern, because
Could I just, let me ask a question?
but what his solution was a very good one, and this is what I want to propose if I can.
Okay, but one thing I just wanted, if you know the answer to, the lower Cabot aquifer must have been mapped by the state.
No, they didn't show any mapping of the lower Cabot aquifer. No, all they did was a source protection plan. They didn't do an actual mapping of the aquifer, because I asked him and he looked it up and it was not listed. Okay. And he came up with a really good solution, and I don't know if I can see to read this very well. But his solution is, it is up to the towns to determine how to best fund groundwater and aquifer mapping projects. Our opinion for the partial funding of such projects is in the U.S. Geology Survey's National Cooperative Geology Mapping Program, State Map Program. State Map funds are from the federal level and are matched by state funds to help pay for the geological mapping that is used, along with the water well data, as a basis to diffuse recharge areas and potential high and low yields for the town. Typically, interested towns were also expected to provide some funding towards the completion of the groundwater resource map. Funding levels are vary among towns, but it's suggested here that we could get a grant and actually examine this, which I think would be just terribly wise to do. And I think that this wouldn't take an exorbitant amount of time. I would like to see us be able to do that before we proceed any further. Because I think hooking onto something when we're in a drought, this was mentioned right in the Harvard Gazette. I mean, I read it, and we have had drought situations, so that's why today we're looking, we've got plenty of water. You come midsummer, we may not. We may never get the water back, and we need to be really careful in the future plans of this town. We've already got like 7 houses now building here. I expect more to come in the future. I think that it's something that we should be interested in having this mapped out before we grant anything, and I think that's a reasonable request.
And I also wanted to state that the 78,000 gallons per month for potable use seems extremely low, because we were
Are these all the papers I came with?
No, we've got.
Sorry.
in our figures, and we're figuring this is really low usage, is 24 gallons per employee per day, and we're assuming they have about 325 employees per day, and that would equal 234,000 gallons per month.
Also, it only average 8 gallons per employee per day, which would be substandard. I assume that in a foodborne industry, they'd have to use the toilets and wash afterwards, and I don't think 8 gallons is gonna go very far. Plus, you've got the tourists coming in there. You have a lot of other needs for potable needs that are not mentioned
The
there.
Creamery's using 15, that's their estimate.
Right, that's going to that office for faculty, for that 1-inch line.
Well, that's across the board. That's their estimate for,
Yeah, but 8 isn't gonna cut it, Caleb.
well, where do you get 8?
If you
We're
add in the
dividing.
employees and you divide that by the gallons, 78,000 gallons per month, you've got to put tourists in there, plus they've got a lab there, that's gonna use a lot of water.
So,
I know, my mother worked in the lab, you've got to do a lot of dishes in there and stuff, that's potable needs.
Do you have a copy of the census and the letter of March 30th? Do you want to look at that?
Sure.
They're talking about the manufacturing plant, the garage, cut and wrap, and the admin building.
But I showed the schematics where it only goes to the office building.
Right, right, they're planning to replumb everything.
Now, can I get a copy of
But they're
this?
not
Sure,
gonna
it's
replumb
probably-
from that 1-inch line, they're gonna replumb to the main.
I actually may have two
Do
of
you
them.
have one of these?
Let's see, this is the same as that, isn't it?
I don't know. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, you can have that, and
Thank you.
I have two of these.
I just think that we don't want to do something in haste, just because we got plenty of water today, and I think that that's something is, you know, the District 5 environmental is concerned enough about it so that they've taken action. And I think the town of Cabot should be thinking about what they're doing too.
Was that letter copied to us, from
I-
Outstanding? Does it have our name on it?
Let me see if it is. Well, of course, he had the first page of it someplace, you know what I'm saying, where the different places he sent it to, Caleb, and I'm not sure, do you need a copy of this?
Yeah, I'd like to have
Can I get you a copy and
Yeah.
send it in?
that. Yeah, do you have a scanner?
Yeah.
Yeah, just email it to us.
What's your email address here?
tcocabot@fairpoint.net.
Miss Alexander, can you clarify the 8 gallons piece?
That was
I'm sorry, your name?
My name's Tyler.
Oh, you're Tyler.
the 8 gallons was what, we took the figure that they wanted, which was 78,000 gallons per month. They had given a figure of 325 employees, so we just divided that in there and figured out that made 8 gallons per person, per day, which, you know, in a food, I would be scared, I guess, if I thought we were only using 8 gallons of water for toilet and washing, and this is drinking too, because it was mentioned water fountains and, you know, and all those other uses, that's just, it's not gonna be sufficient, and why would they ask for it to begin with? If they were trying to sell a well to the Cabot Village to begin with, and also they have said they've had sufficient water on all of their permits.
And the other thing is, even not their potable needs, they claim that the 72.5 gallons per minute equals 38,106 gallons per year, and figuring out 185,000 gallons per day that they claim they need for their non-potable needs is about 76 million gallons per year.
That's what they're permitted to discharge of water
Yeah.
per day.
76 million gallons a day.
Right.
Per
I
year.
did. I hope you realize,
water
guys,
material though.
this is.
Water, they have to take out the,
Water.
it's
What,
water.
but you're trucking, they're trucking in tankers and tankers of milk. I'm just wondering
No,
if
no, it isn't.
that's
But
the water is what you're saying.
Right, there's a process of curds and whey, I guess Alan could explain this.
But it
And
isn't.
what's left beyond that, they found a market for the whey. They've obviously found a market for the cheese, for the curds on top,
You're
so
just
what's
talking
left is
strictly
dirty
water.
vats.
Yeah.
And this is all pumped down and through.
It's wash water.
But at any rate, I hope
Wash
you
it.
guys realize that this is enough waste to fill half the septic tanks in the state of Vermont every day. Now, if you think that it's gonna rain just over Cabot and replenish that water, I'm telling you, I think somebody's sadly mistaken. I think there's 21st century methods, and we've been investigating those, because I'm not here. I love to have the creamery stay, it's part of my heritage. The creamery is part of my life. I mean, we grew up shipping milk to the creamery and everything else, but I think they've got to start using 21st century methods,
I'll get it to you, Ed. Thank you, sir.
you know, to dispose it, so they don't use that much water. And they're always saying that they're recycling, and every permit is saying that they're conserving water. And yet, as you could see from the usage,
Okay.
those figures aren't matching.
I'll give you another chance to speak if you want, but I think Ed would like a chance to
Sure.
address some of these issues.
Yeah, there's been a great deal of information that you've been delivered in a very short period of time, and I'm going to try and qualify as much of it as I possibly can. Let's talk about the well that got sold. That's well before my time, and I believe the well was right in behind here when the creamery was down in this location. So it wasn't located here, so I believe that's the well that we're talking about. It has nothing to do with our operations that we have now. We
That was
have,
the well that went with a different cheese.
What was the cheese place?
yeah, that's as I understand it, and I think that's the well that Larry Goji was talking about. So when the manufacturing facilities are now in a different location, I believe the creamery did not have need for that well, and they had sufficient water supply with the wells that they had. We currently have 3 wells. We had 3 wells back in 1986. They were permitted by the ANR Water Division and Engineering Department, I believe is what it was called at that time, for 105 gallons per minute. There's 3 wells that supply that amount of water. When we applied for the permit to put the cut and wrap building in the testimony someplace, somebody had asked about how much water do you think you're going to be using? And that's where the 70 gallons per minute or the 72.5 gallons per minute came into play. And so we're under the impression that we are permitted by the ANR for 105 gallons per minute. And the commission is saying, well, somebody gave testimony that was 72.5 gallons per minute. They cannot find that document or that testimony anyplace. And that's what we are petitioning the environmental court for at this point in time, is to have a ruling on whether we have 105 gallons per minute, which is the agency that rules in this case, the ANR or the Act 250 Commission is part of that. So we have 105 gallons per minute in the wells that we have. Some of the things that you've heard about the water usage in the facility, generally we're using at around the rate of about 60 gallons per minute. There are times when we do exceed that amount, and that's what Jill is talking about when it goes above the 72.5
I think that 2-year
gallons
period
per
showed
minute.
the metered amounts. I mean, they didn't lie, that was done, those were metered amounts. I didn't make them up, nor could I, and that was back before they got the increase, so,
Could we, could I look at those?
sure you can, I'm trying to find them again.
And could
Right.
we, let's just let Ed finish before we.
This was March of 2006 to 2008, and those are the only actual pumping records. You can see this is well 1, well 2, and well 3. These are the combined figures.
Yeah, don't confuse gallons per minute with thousands of gallons per day, please.
I'm not. These are gallons per, it says right on it. This was a document that was produced by the Johnson Company as part of a source protection plan by Agrimar. And this is what the jurisdictional opinion is based on is because their figures of 50 some odd gallons per minute are not, they aren't even within range.
Have you looked at this, Ed? I don't see the
I've submitted it in, well, that was part of the Johnson Plan Source Protection Plan. This was also a part of it, you can see at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
I just had them enlarged for that purpose. They're very aware of those figures because they were produced by their company. In fact, as they knew about them all during the hearings.
So what does that say right there? For between
That's
2008?
The amount of water that was.
And their
pumped.
permits,
I
their
just
permits do say, and I showed you the application itself, I think that's in here too, where that was what they requested. That's all they said they needed right there. There is the figure.
Okay, now let's let Ed continue, and then you can speak again after he's done. I just want to hear what he has to say now.
Yeah,
Can we just leave these here for a second?
you can for a minute, sure.
Oh, go ahead, Ed.
Well, again, those numbers are based on the fact that we're permitted by the A&R for 105 gallons per
No.
minute. And in the testimony that was given back in 1986 and 87, part of the requirements are for when you're putting a building in, do you have sufficient water? So when they asked, how much water do you think you're going to use, somebody had said about 72.5 gallons per minute.
This shows the permitted amount right here.
Only to say that we had more than enough water than we thought we were going to need, and that's what that is. And that's what we're contesting with our petition to the environmental court, is for a ruling on, do we have 105 gallons per minute, or do we need an Act 250 permit to increase the amount up to the point of 105 gallons per minute? So that's still under,
So that's a disputed.
that is a disputed claim at this point in time. So let's talk about the water that we do use. Jill had quoted, and there were some figures thrown around about how much water that we have. Generally, we're discharging about 100,000 gallons of water per day. And of course, you're sitting and saying, well, how do you figure that mass balance? You're pulling 80 gallons per minute roughly from
This is a permitted
the
amount.
wells.
It's
The other-
Jill, please
Please
don't
let me
interrupt.
talk, please.
Yeah. He sat there while you were going.
Yeah, I'm just showing you
Please, I'd like to
their actual
finish the
permit.
thought process here. So the mass balance, when you're talking about our discharge permit, the industrial discharge permit is permitted for 150,000 gallons per day. That's if we need to use that additional amount. And again, at one point in time, we bumped up against the old permit of 100,000 gallons per day. So we petitioned for 150,000 gallons per day. That isn't what we're using.
Well, I mean, let me explain that. I mean, there are limits that the Agency of Natural Resources gives you for this. I mean, one of the limits is 75 to 100,000. The next limit is 100 and 150. So you need to apply for 150,000 gallons a day. The reason they did that is because 3 out of their last 5 years, they were at 101, they were at 100 and 500. I mean, you know, so they were looking at consistently over that 100,000. So, and unfortunately, the next limit is 150,000 gallons. That does not, by any way, shape, or imagination, say that they are spreading
They're
150,000
capable
gallons.
of that, which
Of
would
course
mean
they're
they
capable
would
of it,
have
but
to have
that-
the
but that-
water.
but that's the next
They would have
limit.
to have the capacity of
And
water.
that's why we went through the Act
Right.
250 amendment process.
Right.
I mean, you know, I
That's-
sat here and did
But
that.
you know what I'm saying? If they're gonna have the water capacity to do that, should they do that?
Let's let Ed finish his,
Sorry, Ed.
Okay, so let's just say we're at about 100,000 gallons per day of waste that is leaving the facility. The mass balance doesn't seem to make sense. If we aren't drawing that amount of water, where is the rest of the water coming from? Part of our conservation effort is when we take the whey that comes off the bat, we put it through a membrane system, and so we concentrate the whey, and the water that is left over is polished permeate. It is pure water, it's soft distilled water. We use it to feed the boilers, we use it to feed CIP systems, so not all of the water comes from the wells. A lot of it comes from milk that is brought into the facility, so that's where the other water does come from in the facility. In our petition currently, when we talk about the permit that we're required, it is a non-transient, non-community public water supply permit, which we found out we needed and did apply for. The reason, we are a food plant, and through the USDA, FDA, US Public Health, we're supposed to have a qualified water supply for processing. So logically, if we felt we had water supply that is good for food consumption for the products that we're producing, it would certainly be satisfactory for our employees. So when we found out we needed the permit, we did apply for it, and that is the water source permit that we need to carry for domestic use of water in the facility. So that's, we have a choice to use our wells to do that and apply for that source permit, or it was suggested, since the village already has approved water source, that we could connect to the village water supply and use that for domestic usage. Now here's the calculations that we use for this. The 15 gallons per employee per day is not like a residence. These people are here for 8 hours a day, and that's why that estimated number is given. For the buildings that we have here, we have roughly about 260 employees on average, 5 days a week, and if you do the math, it works out to be about 78,000 gallons per month, and that's the figure that we use. So that's the number. It is no additional use of water. When Jill talks about water out of the watershed, that water is coming from the watershed already. They're coming from our wells, and so we aren't looking at any net increase in the amount of water. All we're looking to do is to separate the water supplies